and welcome everybody who's joined us. I just want to check the audio's working. If you can hear me, okay. Can you give me please a 3 in the chat if you can hear me, okay. Somebody was actually asking about this, so exploring pure ecstasy through sacred sexuality, and I think that those are both terms which could do with a bit of defining as well. You know, what is ecstasy? And I would say, I mean, it seems like we are talking about, you know, obviously a experience of sexual pleasure, right? And sexual pleasure is something that people I mean, if we just need to look around us, right, and we can just see the whole culture is, you know, based on sort of chasing this kind of like a sexual pleasure. But it just seems like there's so many people just chasing and chasing, trying to find like a bigger sex toy, a more extreme porn video, new partner, you know, so on and so forth, right? There's all these different things people are chasing to try and get more stimulation, but it seems like people are just becoming, right, you know, more and more desensitized to actual experience of pleasure. And of course, you know, pleasure is something we can experience in every part of our lives. I certainly feel pleasure talking to you guys, and hopefully you feel pleasure pleasure listening, right? You know, when we look at sexual pleasure, for example, you know, there is the pleasure of, for example, going within my body, you know, and experiencing the sensation, but I would say there's also a state of consciousness that can be reached through learning to kind of ride that sort of pleasure experience, and this is kind of what sacred sexuality is about. And in a minute I'm going to go into what sacred sexuality is all about. Of course, there's also the pleasure I feel when I come home with my partner and he's like, I want you, you know, and that feeling of kind of being dominated by him and knowing that you know, that he wants me, you know, like a man wanting a woman, is pleasure. But this is a different kind of pleasure, because what I'm going to be talking about today in this live is that I'm going to be talking about embodied pleasure. Now, let's get on to sacred sexuality. What is sacred sexuality? And obviously sexuality is sacred. You know, sexuality is the path, the direct path to our expansion of consciousness, to our higher states of conscious being, and to our spirituality. So it's a very, very sacred thing. It's what creates us. But of course we have, you know, what we could call, I'm just going to call it, you know, standard Western or standard American sexuality, which you see in porn, or in fact I think a great example is the average Hollywood movie that you watch. And I remember I hadn't watched any movies for like 10 years, and I remember when it was like the 90s and there were all these kind of, you know, you'd have all this build up and then, you know, a little bit of leg stroking, and then it would kind of zoom out and leave it all to your imagination. Whereas you know, suddenly there are these like sex scenes where it's just like boom, okay, like becomes so mechanical, right? And so you know, unjuicy. I was like, wow, yeah, what's happened there? You know, almost like as if it's kind of like putting premature ejaculation on a pedestal or something like that, you know. But then given the fact that, you know, excuse me, everybody these days is right, busy, there's so much rush, you know, people are, despite having all this now sexual imagery around us and porn and so on and so forth, you know, most people don't understand their sexuality. They're not in touch with their own body. Rates of sexual problems are actually on the increase. And I was even seeing that apparently women today are having like less orgasms than they did just like 10 years ago. And apparently men are having less sex and everything. So all this kind of liberation, right? It doesn't seem to be giving us increased experience of pleasure. Excuse me. So let's have a look at this. Like, you know, if we look at like, there's the term tantric sex, right? Tantric sex can mean a lot of things, right? And of course you can go to your average tantra workshop, learn to do a bit of breathing to kind of slow down a little bit. Sure, okay, there are benefits to this, absolutely. You know, this is just a first step of many into understanding sexuality. But then when we look into, when we look at, for example, Taoist sexuality, you have a whole range of different things you can experience through the use of conscious sexuality and sacred sexuality through Taoism. So we talk about regenerating the body on a cellular level. There's a whole science looking into that. Okay, we can look at like increasing our creativity, manifestation. We can look at opening up our consciousness and connecting spiritually, connecting up into the universe and so on. I mean, these are just some of the things that Taoism talks about us getting from our sexuality. But in some way, all of these things are interlinked. They're all playing together. It's not actually that, you know, so much that they're all different categories, although in some sense they are, really. It's all one and the same, and it's like steps that we go through as we start to work with our sexual energy. Now, one of the first things that happens when you start working with your sexual energy is an amplifier. It amplifies everything, yeah. So it's amazing because it shows us exactly where we need to work on ourselves. But if you've taken the average path of spirituality, meditation, and so on, and you've kind of gone into experiencing, let's say, like experiencing your emotions by repressing them, which is what pretty much everyone is telling, you know, us to do, and you've done this really, really great job of spiritually working on yourself, transcending, thinking you've no anger left, and so on. What's going to probably start happening as you start working with your sexual energy is it will start bringing up and amplifying those things, which they're always there, because these emotions, things like anger, they are a part of ourselves. You know, if you're saying, I have no anger, you're either in a real state of ill health or you're deluding yourself. All of these, everything we feel is all part of us. It's all actually perfect if you really understand what our body is about. You really understand the emotional field. You really understand that actually every feeling we have is an important movement of energy that we need to be a whole person, right? So the first thing that sexual energy does is it amplifies and it binds onto our emotions. And I say you can kind of look at sexuality and emotions as this kind of like a bit like a DNA helix, right? So that basically we are feeling the emotions, the sexuality. When we're feeling them together, that's when we really start to get like a heightened feeling of pleasure. So much sexual problems, practically every sexual problem people have comes down to an emotional problem. What I'm saying here is that, you know, for example, things like premature ejaculation, not being able to get an erection, and so on. This is all down to not having a relationship with the emotional world, which means that through the sex act, the autonomic nervous system is being kicked into overdrive, and it's causing the ejaculation to happen too quickly. Now, this combination of the emotional and the sexual world is what actually allows us to expand. And this is why, for example, when people watch these exercises on YouTube here, if I squeeze my perineum, I'm going to have a full body orgasm, and so on. This is why it's not working. This is why people are, for example, men are trying to have sex, trying to not have ejaculation. They're squeezing the perineum, thinking they're following certain exercises, but essentially they're not getting what they want out. You know, they're spending the whole time they're making love, not being able to connect with their beloved because they're trying so hard not to ejaculate. What's going on there is the emotional world has not been integrated with the sexual, and once this becomes integrated, and a huge part of this, you know, there's absolutely exercises, there's techniques, there's ways to emotionally work with this, to work with the emotions, so that we're not doing what a psychologist does and setting stories round and round in circles, but we're just getting them and we're finding them and we're making them into our tools that we can use to have a better and a successful life and better health. So if you're interested, by the way, in knowing about this work, which is called Emotional Alchemy, do be sure to either drop a message, drop a comment asking more info, or send us a direct message, and my assistant will get back to you, because I have some beautiful free resources that I'm giving out that has like much more detail than what I can actually go into here on this live. So once we've got into this state where we're harmonizing the sexual and the emotional world, and we're basically using breath to be able to open that up. Okay, so this is a technique I work on with clients over about a 10-week period, basically, to get the ability to do this, but really it would be like 15 weeks, 4 months, to get the whole thing of being able to then pair with a partner as well. But these is things like, you know, when we look at working around the sexuality, we're going literally against like a whole lifetime of programming, sex negative programming. Not just that, but literally generations, centuries of sex negative programming. And when we want to reverse this and actually come back to our original programming of how it's natural for us to be with our sexuality, it does take, you know, a few months of working on this to really be able to like get these techniques down and get them so that you are really able to fully, absolutely, completely get in touch with this energy. Okay, so once we have the emotional world, let's say we have mastery over the emotional world, we can then start bringing this sexual energy up into the body in a safe way. So if we are, you know, bringing up this sexual energy, we haven't got a handle of the emotional world, what can happen is it will just throw everything kind of into chaos. There'll be a lot of negative feelings, a lot of confusion. It's not a good idea to do that. I definitely don't recommend it. But once you've just done a few weeks work to get your emotional world into place, you can then start to raise the sexual energy. Well, first of all, the first transformation center is in the heart. And when this energy starts reaching the heart and combining with the love energy of the heart and transforming, what it does is it basically produces this purple energy, which starts to spread through the whole body. And the kind of first thing that it does is it actually starts to heal the body on a cellular level. So that means it's actually rejuvenating the cells and turning the cells back to their original programming. And it's doing the same thing also to the glands. And as this happens, it's very normal to have like a feeling of vibration within the body and a feel of opening and expansion within the mind. And this produces this feeling of, it's a very, very pleasurable feeling, but let's just say that it's almost like the pleasure is a sign of the energy moving. The pleasure is something that we work with, but when we're working with this, it's almost like the goals in the long term are bigger and greater and grander than actually just pleasure in and of itself. And also, we're not talking about, even though, yeah, don't get me wrong, I love that, you know, my man making me feel like a woman kind of pleasure. This is a different kind of a pleasure that we're talking about, because we're actually talking about the feeling of our bodies, the energy moving and activated within our bodies. And as the different energy centers start to activate and start to open in the heart, in the third eye, what we call in Taoism the crystal palace, this has the ability to really send us off into real heightened states of bliss, which we can actually go and immerse ourselves into for hours at a time. And in these places, we can actually start to experience, those are my neighbor dogs, by the way. They're lovely, but they do howl like wolves at times, right? So you're actually able to start like really exploring into yourself, exploring into consciousness, your own consciousness, but at the same time you're being given this ability to like access the entire universal collective consciousness as well. So I want to check now who is first of all, let me know if you're here. Give me a like, please. I would appreciate. And I'd love to hear if anyone here has any questions about what I've just talked about. Let me just grab a drink from inside. Maybe the dogs Yeah, maybe the dogs drowned me out. But let me know, do you have any questions about what I just mentioned? Type them into the chat. I do find it so cute how all the neighboring dogs are just talking to each other, although not everybody appreciates this. And if you're new to this, definitely reach out, because I have some free resources I can send out to you. If you, I know that there's some people here that's been around for a little longer, and I definitely recommend to get in touch with me and have a think about, actually taking and implementing these practices into your life. Because ultimately the theory is all really, really fantastic, but it's only by actually going into the practices and implementing them into your life that you're really gonna be able to have these experiences. So yeah, there are talking about processing emotions, and it's so good, that we're talking about emotions here here, because it's so important, to be looking and talking about these emotions without, because it's so central and it's so key to everything. So if you want to start moving energy, I recommend work with me for, it's a minimum of like 6 weeks before we start moving energy. If you start moving energy, I was just mentioning earlier, if you start moving energy without doing the preliminary work, you can cause yourself all kinds of health problems. It's really, really important to go through the whole process. And I know that, the whole thing of like moving energy, it's so exciting, it's so fun, but without doing the preliminary work and really investing in yourself, in your time, and really making a daily practice of, first of all, clearing out your emotional world. Moving the energy, it's I could say give you all these different techniques, but I've been contacted so often by people who've copied a YouTube video about moving energy, have all these different problems that arouse out of it, never wish they'd never did it, and I don't really want to be, bringing bad karma onto myself by facilitating people to do things that could cause them, to feel harm. This morning I had to focus on breathing into my heart before class. And the thing is, emotions will always be there. Emotions are part of the world. Emotions are, the emotions are part of us. They're part of living. So, and it's really, really beautiful, especially when emotions like anger come up and we're actually able to go, you know what? I felt angry and I'm really cool about feeling angry. I mean, my partner is like, if I'm angry, my partner is like, oh, you're so cute when you're angry, and it's interesting that as I've got more in tune and comfortable with my own anger, that I have a partner who's like, oh, your anger is so cute, and I just think of my anger as this little kind of fluffy, cute little animal, And when we think that that's what anger is, it's just this little wounded, hurt child that's just going, please, give me some attention, give me some love, instead of like this big monster that we need to be terrified and scared of. then becomes like a really, really like different thing. So Maury, yeah, let's talk message me, Maury, and yeah, let's see what I can sort out for you. So it's been great having this live, and I'm coming back on Sunday, 8 p.m, a little bit later, talking about I'm going to be talking about vaginas and the magical power inside of vaginas. I think I did call it female sexuality, but basically I'm going to be talking about activating our vaginas. So I definitely recommend come and join me. See you there on Sunday.